just kind of a quick recap. Let's see what. If you can give me just a second, let me try to arrange stuff so I can see everybody. There we go. Just kind of recapping what we've talked about the last 2 weeks. According to the authors of this book, what they consider a primary fear is the term they use, but kind of the most basic fear that kids begin with as a toddler is really the fear of abandonment, and that makes sense since really a child is completely lost and without hope, if you will, if they were to be abandoned. And then just to take that a step further is, the fear is not only if you're abandoned, not only the separation, but just the total loss that you might feel like you've lost your whole sense of yourself. And talked about how that can carry over into adulthood and how that does make such a difference if that fear isn't conquered early and dealt with early in their life. As they start to get a little bit older, there's a fear by many children as they develop that there's the ability to lose mommy or daddy's approval. And sometimes in the way that a child's mind works, and is not always logical and rational, the behavior can be very counterintuitive when somebody is fearful of that. But it's important that we reinforce to those children that there is no line. There's consequences when you step over lines, but there is no line that you will lose our love. And if they feel secure in that and deal with that fear, they're less likely to reach out and try to find that line. And then we talked a little bit about the Oedipal phenomenon, where children start to latch on to one sex, generally the opposite sex, and kind of push away the same sex. And the best way to handle that in the author's mind is a strong, loving relationship between the mother and father that teaches the children the way the two sexes should be working together. And if you're in a situation, or if you know somebody that's in a situation where there's a divorce or they're only with one parent, it's important to have a good role model of the other sex there for that child's development to see how that interaction should take place. Although that does bring about its own difficulties, and we talked a little about it. When say a parent moves back in with the grandparents, how sometimes that relationship kind of forms back into a child-parent relationship between the grandparents and the parent, and that's not good for the child. The other thing is the child and the parent. Sometimes, if there's a single parent household, they kind of start living almost as if they're equals instead of having that healthy child-parent relationship, and that's not good for the development of the child either. Last week we spent a lot of time on kind of that late preschooler age group. We talked about how children in that age sometimes become fearful of adults, or more specifically the ability for a larger, stronger adult to overpower them. And that can be seen in large animals, that can be seen in large bullies or whatever, but that oftentimes, according to these authors anyway, they see that a lot in their practices, that children have this fear of an adult and it's never dealt with, and that has consequences later in life. Then we spent quite a bit of time talking about nightmares and night terrors and how to avoid that. Went through several things, a good routine, getting plenty of rest, being mindful of what they see, what they watch and hear, and things of that nature. But there's just kind of a quick a quick rundown. We want to give, I'll pause for 10 seconds for station identification, and I'll pause for 10 seconds. And, if anybody would like to say, has the thought on last week or the week before, or wants to comment on that, would love to hear your thoughts.
Just saying hello, ladies, and Kyle.
And we do have a few men. Well, we've got at least one. And Heather, I'm assuming that Roger's with you.
Yes, I'm here.
Sorry, I was on my phone and I did not slide over to see everybody. I just saw Kendra and Linda. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Janda.
Hello.
Hello, Heather and Roger.
All right. Well, moving on to this week, want to start out with a question. Do any of you remember sitting down with your parents and having your parents read to you when you were a child? I'm seeing a few head shake no. I'm not hearing anybody speak up.
My parents never read to me when I was younger. They were always too busy. And I think I followed the same pattern and did not read to my daughter and my kids. But fortunately, Kendra has broken that pattern. She reads to her children, and she always has. And she reads to Adam, as well as she read to Jasmine and John Luke too, right? Yeah, she broke the pattern. She broke the mold.
Part of that's probably from being a teacher, and hearing about how important it is.
Yeah, I don't remember really mom and dad reading to me, and I was kind of they're not on today, and that probably means mom's struggling to to get her phone to work. Is usually what it means when she's not on a Zoom call. But I was going to be interested to hear what she said. If she said, "Wait a minute, I read to you all the time. What'd you forget?" But I feel like that was not something we did much in our household either. And it was mostly, when I was young, my dad was a coach and would get home pretty late usually. And and we had kids, and I was one of 5 kids, and oftentimes we had foster kids with us, and mom was just struggling to get food on the table and clothes in the laundry, and it just wasn't something that I remember us doing much. But it is certainly something that we have tried to do with our boys when they were young an awful lot, because of so much research that is prevalent now about that. And even when the kids, in fact, that was probably most of the reading that we did was well before they even knew what we were saying, didn't understand what we were saying, but just the connection of the voice, and them sitting on our lap and hearing us talk, and the cadence and things is really good for the child. And then, as they get older, our oldest, Jalen, really took on a liking to reading and being read to, and he now reads. I mean, it's not uncommon for him to go to the library and get 2 books and read them both in a single week. At times, our younger 2, our middle and youngest, it's a struggle to get them to read. They have not taken on the love of reading that Jalen has, but it's important. That connection is important. Really, the late, the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These authors say it's still just so important to read to them, allow them to read, and to tell stories. Really, the storytelling and the time talking together is really probably the most important part of it. But sometimes it's hard to. Not all of us are really good storytellers, and I would struggle. I remember the boys used to like me to sit in there, and I would make up a few stories. You know, I had a story occasionally they'd ask me to tell about a granddaddy long leg, you know, that I'd made up, and you know, and you know, just other things that I couldn't. But it was a struggle. Sometimes, like, do you have to hear it again? I mean, it was a struggle to make up things. Reading is a way that you don't have to make it up. It's kind of already there on the page for you. But hearing those stories is really important. One of the things that I really worry about in today's society, and really it's in tomorrow's society, that I'm afraid of what the effects are going to be. I'm sure y'all have seen it. I'm sure we participate in it sometimes, even with our kids. But you know, we'll be at a restaurant, you know, and sitting at a table and look over there, and you know, there's a family of 4 or 5, and every one of them's got a phone in their hand, and it's you know, there's no interaction with each other, and I really worry that you know, not only do you not have that interaction, but there's never a time for the brain, never a time for the brain to imagine and to think. You know, it's just a constant visual stimulation from the phone. And Jan and I were at a soccer game the other day, and Jan, I don't know, that kid, he was in a stroller, sitting in a stroller, looked like he was, you know, less than 2, and the entire soccer game had, the kid could turn and I don't even know he could talk, but he could operate the phone that he had in his hand. It makes me a little worried what the long-term effects will be to that. Janda, were you about to say something?
No, go ahead.
All right. And but anyway, I kind of digress. But that storytelling, the picture, the allowing the mind to work. I mean, you know, and I don't want to make it sound like movies and video is bad, but again, there's no opportunity for the mind to create in that. And you know, when you're reading a book or when somebody's telling you a story, you kind of have to picture what's going on, and well, now what would that look like? How would that happen? There's work that has to occur, and I think really that's one reason a lot of people don't like to read, is they don't like the work involved. But you know, remember, I've used this analogy a lot, and I'll probably use it a lot more because I don't have very many analogies. I tend to stick with the same things. But you know, if we want to teach a child math, we don't give them math answers, we give them math problems. And by the same token, if you with a video, it's kind of like you've got all the answers there. But with a story, with a book, you know, the child is an active participant in it, and it has to work it out for himself, the details of it. And so that can be really, really good to them. But beyond just the development of the mind and the exercising of the mind, it's an important connection. You know, think about all the times I'm thinking of Deuteronomy, but it's so prevalent in the Old Testament, where God is telling the Israelites, you know, when you lie down, when you get up, when you are walking, you know, tell this to your children, you know, tell them the story. You know, when your children see those 12 stones there by the Jordan, and they ask you, what do those mean? You know, tell them, you know, what God did for you there. Or when you're taking the bitter herbs at Passover, or, you know, just there's always these triggers to get the child to ask, and then the parent to explain what it is. And there seems to be a connection with stories. You know, God, I think, has created us that way. And certainly he wanted the Israelites to be that way. And I think it's really good for us. Certainly the authors have picked up on that it's important to talk to children and have stories. They form so much of their opinion and their conscience from stories. And you want those stories to be from you and be well well grounded. They give the example of Daniel. Think about Daniel and his three friends. They're captured by the Babylonians and they're hauled off, halfway across the world. And, they have no idea what's going to happen to them. No, they're essentially slaves, but they see something in these four boys. And so they put them in with the group, and remember they give them, the finest meat and the wine. And it would have been so easy for them to say, man, we didn't eat this good back in, in Israel. I mean, this is a change for the better. But there was something with them where they recognized something isn't right here. And of course they said, can you let us just have water and vegetables and let us abstain from all of this? And, and then God blessed them, and they were showed to be even healthier, and they ended up allowing them to do that. But it would have been so easy for them to take the easy way out. I guess that's a little bit of a redundancy there, but it would have been so easy for them to do that. And yet I feel like, at least for those four guys, they were well grounded, and most likely that grounding had to have come from time, being taught, probably with their parents and things back before they were captured. So it's important for us to be that voice. So often children, their opinions and their values are formed by what they watch on television, by what they hear from friends or see, even in schools. We're pretty fortunate generally speaking, in Texas, more so in Lubbock, but even some of the things that the spirit behind some of the things that are taught in kinder, you might be able to speak to this better than me, but there just seems to be a direction that school curriculums are trying to shape minds, and you definitely see it up north, and we hear about it all the time. And it's important again that children are grounded in what we teach them and what people that we respect teach them, versus what a common thought is, and I'm thinking of evolution and things like that. One of the examples that they give, and I don't know, I'm assuming that all these stories are true and they've added different names, but I don't know exactly all the details and how closely they're, are they inspired stories, inspired on a true story, or are they exactly truthful? But one of the examples they give is about a girl that had asked her dad, hey, is it all right to eat animals? And and the dad was like, yeah, of course it is, And then she watched Harry and the Hendersons, which just kind of shows how old this book is. But I don't know if has anybody seen that movie, Harry and the Hendersons? Did y'all watch that I think it was back in the early 90s.
It's been a long time ago.
Yeah, I don't even remember all what, it's if you haven't seen it, it's Bigfoot. They found him out, this family, I guess the Hendersons found Bigfoot out in the wild, and they brought him home, and they try to protect him. And I guess there's evil people out there that were trying to capture him or whatever. I don't remember the details. I'm not even certain I've seen the whole movie, but I've definitely seen parts of it. But I guess the message in there is, hey, you can't kill animals and stuff like that. And it shaped this girl's mind. And after seeing the movie, she was like, we can't eat animals. And her parents were kind of dumbfounded that, it shocked them how quickly a single movie completely changed her perspective. And these doctors that wrote this book said, that's not uncommon at all. Children form so much of their conscience based off of stories and imagery, especially things that are, more fantasy. The less real it is, the easier it is for them to shape their opinion from it. You know, and that can be in a good way. You know, for instance, they mentioned that dragons, the story of dragons, are a really good thing. I mean, they're you know, you have this big looming monster that's evil, and it can destroy, and you know, the shining knight that you know, has to defend this thing, but the knight conquers it and defeats it, and that's, you know, that shapes the child's mind, reinforces the idea that scary things can be conquered. You know, Cinderella is a story, you know, of somebody with a good heart, you know, can be rewarded. Beauty and the Beast, that your beauty lies within and not necessarily outward. And the prodigal son, you know, you can be forgiven. You know, stories like this are good examples and good ways for your child to learn through stories and shape their opinions and values. But there's a lot of junk out there too, and that's the scary thing, is if you're not filling them with good stories, they can shape it in a at best a benign way, but even worse, in a bad way. You know, when I was growing up, and I would say kind of the you know, late 70s throughout the 80s is kind of my childhood. You know, there's a lot of stuff on TV. The Three's Company, and there was a rerun on the other day, and I was watching it, and I was like, man alive, I had no idea there were so many innuendos and stuff in this thing. But the movies or the shows that I remember are more like you know, I remember watching a lot of Leave It to Beaver reruns and Andy Griffith reruns, and you know, Family Matters and The Cosby Show and things like that. And all those shows seemed, you know, they always kind of had a positive message in them. You know, you'd kind of, when it was all said and done, there was a lesson, and everybody, you know, it was a lesson that pretty much everybody in America could agree, hey, that's a good message. I don't know what stuff is on TV anymore. We you know, we pretty much watch the news and you know, sports. That's about all we watch. But certainly I know there's sitcoms. Probably the last sitcom I ever watched, and I really didn't watch it, was when it was in syndication and on reruns, was like Seinfeld, stuff like that. And there's no positive message in Seinfeld. I mean, I find it funny, but there's no good message in it. In fact, I had Janda, Carla, I believe it was Carla, that, you know, when Janda and I were much younger and hanging out as kind of college age kids at Green Lawn, there's a group of us, you know, we'd go eat after class and stuff like that. But I remember the last episode of Seinfeld, they go through all the characters. Are there any Seinfeld fans on here?
Heather said I have to chime in.
So, you know, like I said, I never watched it when it's on, but I had a roommate that was religiously watched it, and I would watch it later on, but the last episode, I've never really seen the whole thing, but I've seen bits and pieces, and they bring all these characters from the series back on that have been mistreated, you know, in various series, and they're kind of condemning Seinfeld and his friends. And I remember Carla saying that last episode was really the whole reason I never liked the show. You know, it just showed what bad people they were, and I guess there was some truth to that. But I would say even worse is there's a lot of stuff on television that's not even, you know, everybody looks at Seinfeld or The Simpsons or, you know, things like that, and they say, yeah, these people are dumb, and, you know, nobody wants to be like them. But there's a lot of movies and shows where, I mean, you get to the end, you're like, I don't even know who the good guy was. You know, it's not clear who was good and who was bad. And I remember Dale talking about, many years ago, had a sermon on this subject. And he listed out a few movies. The only one I remember is Breaking Bad. At the time, I had several coworkers that really liked that series. But that's, if you don't know what it is, it's a school teacher that thought he had cancer, and he started making what's the drug?
Just meth.
Meth. Yeah. Methamphetamine. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah. Meth, and selling it. And then he gets kind of wrapped up in it, and, but the whole thing is, you got the good guy of the show. The main character is not really a good guy. And I guess they're, Hollywood's point that they're making is, well, this is life. Nobody's good, and to me, that's a terrible message. And I mean, even like The Godfather, which is kind of an American classic, if you will. I've never seen it, so maybe I shouldn't judge, but it just doesn't even appeal to me, because I like the movies where there's the Cinderella movies, and, where the good person is truly a good person. And I feel like there's a lot more values being taught there. I've gone way off on tangents. I apologize for that. But I will say one more thing, and then I'd like to stop and give y'all a chance to talk and give your own points. But just, I guess if you're going to try to wrap up what I've blathered on about for a while here, is the importance of connection between us and our children, and often through stories, whether that's read or whether that's told, and also giving them a chance to tell back and listening to what's on their heart. You can really learn a lot from them. But there is a whole other side that will fill that void if we're not providing that. So anyway, let me shut up and let y'all weigh in here.
I don't know where it was or the exact statistic any longer. Of course, they say what, like 90% of statistics are actually made up. Anyway, the statistic said something about the more you watch TV, the less you are content with your life. Because there's so much of a message of materialism on television, and it can kind of send that, give the idea or the impression that, you see these people, and maybe you have a job that's similar to the job that they have, and they're living in a mansion, and they've got these fancy cars, and it's like, well, I should be able to have that too. And so it really does sway the perception. And so I can only imagine that if we as adults or young adults' minds are persuaded that way by watching television, how much more so kids who don't have the ability to kind of temper that with reality.
Yeah, that's a great point, Roger. Yeah, and I just incidentally, as you say that, talk about the materialism and stuff, and it's amazing how everybody on television is rich. And I guess it was back in the 80s. I remember when Roseanne, that sitcom, came on, and and I didn't watch much, but I remember my older sister watching an episode and saying, finally there's a show where it's a normal American, they live in a normal house that's dirty and not, they've got a laminate floors, and finally somebody we can relate to. But you're absolutely right. It's just materialism, and I would even go so far as manipulation and relationships, and it's just drama all the way around. I can definitely believe that statistic, even if it is one of the 90% that was made up. I could believe it.
I was going to say that I agree with what Roger said. Definitely, there's a lot of that on sitcoms and the drama shows and things like that. But what I was thinking of when you were asking for comments, and some to do with what Roger said is, you said we watch the news a lot, and actually watching the news makes me feel more content in 2021 and 2020. And I think the main reason is because of where we live, specifically dealing with schools, the kids being able to go to school, the teachers being able to teach, and in person specifically. You were talking about emotions and things like that at the very beginning of back at 7:05 or whatever time it was. There's research showing that it's so important for them to be in school, for them specifically to be around other people their age. And so watching TV, watching specifically the news actually makes me feel like we're doing okay. You hear about the bad stories of how things are in some of the other states and some of the other cities and, things like that. And so watching it now, in some respects, I'm just saying the respect about COVID. I'm not talking about everything in everyday life, but yeah, we've had plenty of cases here, but all in all, it makes me feel content when listening to some of the situations in other areas.
Yeah, and I would even say that the quality of teachers that we enjoy here in this area compared to, some of the, and I know there's good teachers everywhere and there's bad teachers everywhere, but it feels like the Northeast and the upper Midwest has more than their fair share of scary teachers, and we on the other hand have a very more than our fair share of good teachers, and teachers that actually still care about the subject matter and care about the kids, and that's just my opinion. That's probably not a very educated opinion, but it's certainly, when I read articles and listen to the news, it certainly feels that way. So well, let me move on into this idea of forming a conscience and developing internalized what's right and wrong. A 1-year-old or a 2-year-old really don't know right from wrong. What the way that psychologists call that is a non-internalized conscience. That's their fancy word for basically saying, what's right and wrong is dependent on what, if mom says it's right, it's right. If dad says it's wrong, it's wrong. That's, I do, if I get in trouble, I know not to do that. If I don't get in trouble, I can do that again. And it's over time that children begin to internalize that and understand right and wrong without having to be told. But that doesn't happen accidentally, and it doesn't happen spontaneously. It requires iteration and examples and opportunities to go through the learning process. And so when a child does something that's not right and he suffers consequences, he begins to learn that that's not right. When he gets rewarded, he or she begins to learn that it is acceptable, or it's good behavior. And it's important for children to go through that process. Some of the parents that the authors talk about, they say so many of the problems we see in even adults, we can trace back to when that child was young and their parents, didn't want to discipline them because, they're too young to know right from wrong, or not even discipline, but just protect them from consequences. I told you not to stand on the table, and then just like a helicopter parent, when the child stands on the table and, let me come catch you. That may be a dumb example, but hopefully you can kind of extrapolate and think of better examples than I can. But if you never allow the child to suffer the consequences of bad choices when they've been told right from wrong, then they never learn. They never go through that process of developing it for an internal form of conscience. And this really happens a lot when remember the story I gave, I think last week, of the little boy named Willard. His dad left the family early on, and then Willard became kind of a tyrant, and the mom started dating another guy, and the guy was like, your kid is a mess. You either got to choose me or the kid, and she chose the man. So Willard goes and lives with the grandparents, and the grandparents feel sorry for him, so they don't ever discipline him. Well, he's got such a rough life, and in reality, the only training this child is going to get is with those grandparents. And so it's so important for the grandparent to fill that role. And instead they backed away from the role because they felt sorry for the kid. And, Roger and Heather, y'all probably see these kinds of situations a lot. And, how detrimental it would be if you said, oh, this kid's had a rough life. We can't teach him right from wrong, or allow him to suffer consequences and praise for doing wrong or right. That you would rob that child of the ability to develop and form values and conscience. And so it's really important that children know those, and again, know that there's lines, there's boundaries that if they cross, there are consequences, but there's not a line that if you cross, you'll lose our love. And and taking Willard, that example, if the grandmother or the grandfather would have set those boundaries, and when he crossed them, he suffered the consequences, but they still loved him and still cared for him and wanted to keep him on the right side of that line, the correct side of that line. I'm sure he would, wail and moan and complain, but the more times that, even though I suffer the consequences, they do love me, and over time begin to shape him into instead of somebody that nobody likes, somebody that people can enjoy, basically internalizing a conscience. When kids are in this situation, the boys tend to, or they never have that ability to never are taught, never allowed to suffer consequences, never internalize a conscience. Boys tend to, since they're generally around their teenage years, they're starting to get stronger. They can bully people, or they can break things, or they can act out. That's usually what the boys tend to do, is be physical and disruptive. Girls, on the other hand, generally, and there's exceptions, of course, but generally tend to be more manipulative in their behavior. That's how you see this play out generally. But it's important. It's important that immediately, you got to do it. I mean, you want to do it early, but it's never too late to start. It only gets worse over time. And so you got to start as soon as you can. The reason it's so important to do it early is, the older a child gets, the less influential the parent becomes. They start having, just naturally, they start separating from the parent. They're away from the parent more often. I heard a statistic, and this may be one of those, Roger, this may be one of the 90% that was made up, but just kind of thinking through it, I feel like it could be, I feel like it's probably accurate, but I've heard that from the time a child is, or by the time your child is 10 years old, you have spent half of all the time you will ever spend with that child. And I don't know if 10 is the right age, but if you start thinking through, I mean, it's got to be somewhere around that range. You see your children less, they're in school more, they're away from you, they're with friends, they're hanging out, they're getting a job. those early years are so important to spend with your child, because you just don't have that many left, not in the quantity that you do early on. And so so it's important that parents, that we reinforce this to parents, spend that time early, be influential with them early, their values early. The other thing is not only do you not have the opportunities as they start to get older, but while you're less influential, outside influences are stronger. They're around their friends more, they're around other adults more, they're around people that may or may not have the same values that you do. And really, if by the time they're in their teens, birds of a feather flock together. They tend to gravitate towards kids or adults that reinforce what they already believe. So if they're kind of rebellious, they tend to be attracted to other kids that are rebellious, or other kids that reinforce this idea of they're invulnerable, or the rules don't apply to them, etc. And so there's two primary things working there against you. And so it's really important that these decisions and these consequences and formations are made early. So kind of I see that I'm here. I thought I was going to, I told Kendra when she first logged on that I was going to end this class early, and here I'm already 7:50, and I'm not, I still got several things to talk about. So let me kind of just quickly transition a little. Well, let me first break for just 5 seconds and ask for your thoughts or comments on anything that we've said up to now. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I can definitely see when you were talking about the girls being more manipulative and the boys being more aggressive and physical. In Adam's case, Adam reacts in a physical way when he's upset with something, or wants his own way. He tends to lash out physically. His mother, on the other hand, who we adopted when she was 14, became very, very manipulative. But I was the one who felt sorry for her and didn't make the lines really good and let her suffer her own consequences. So, anyway, but I see that manipulative part about the girls and the physical part about the boys clear as day with her and her son.
Yeah, and it is, and that's not to say the boys can't be manipulative and girls can't be angry and destructive, but that tends to be the general response to that. And it's a difficult thing to allow a child, especially a child that's in a tough situation, that has a tough background, to allow them to suffer the consequences. But it's important. It's important to do so. Well, kind of transitioning, not a very good segue, but just drawing this back to the fears that grade schoolers tend to get. We've talked about the ones up to now, really in kind of that early grade school period. Two of the main fears, according to these authors, that really become the root of so many other fears is one, the fear of competition, and then the fear of not measuring up. And on the competition, it's really not so much that, you probably have known some young children that are scared to compete. They're scared to get involved in anything where there's a success or failure kind of thing. They just want to stay out of that. So much of that, I think a lot of it has been driven by our society. They have an example in the book where a mother was talking about, we found these games. It's a company out of California that has these games where there's not a winner or loser, and then the doctor's like, well, what is that? Of course, she's seeing the doctor because she's having problems with the child. So, she should already know something she's doing isn't right. But they said, well, how do you have a game where there's no competition? He said, well, what happens? You get together and then you try to work things out together. Like, what do you, she says, well, like, for instance, you get together and you try to save the whales. I mean, that's one of the little games, and the idea is there's not a winner and there's not a loser. We have the same thing a lot in, our soccer games and stuff. Well, we don't keep score and I think that's and it is probably appropriate and that's fine. It's especially probably good for some of the parents that haven't learned that it's not all about winning and losing, but kids have an innate ability to recognize that competition is part of life. Even the game where they get together and they try to figure out how to save the whales, you're competing against, were you successful in saving the whales or not, or whatever the instance is, even if it's internal. Was I able to, achieve what I wanted to? Was I able to get up in time? I mean, there's competition is innate. Winning and losing is part of what we are, and it's not something to hide or run away from. It's something to teach the child how to do appropriately. How do you compete? How do you keep your values during competition? How do you handle loss? How do you handle victory? And so trying to avoid competition really just strengthens that fear, and you never board up that room, a fear to compete if you never allow the child to compete and even feel the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat. The other thing, just real quickly, is fear of measuring up. Just like Willard, the example with Willard, he needs to know that there's a line that, if I cross it, I'm going to suffer consequences, but I will never lose my parents' love. The same thing with achievement needs to constantly be reinforced to children, especially in these early school, grade school ages, that if you don't succeed, you're still loved. If you don't get across the line, maybe is the way of thinking, you're still loved. Mom and dad still love you. Now there are consequences for how much effort you put in and whether you make it across the line, or if you don't put much effort in and you don't make it. There's consequences and there's rewards for that. But what defines whether we love you or not is not how successful it is, how successful you are. Your love, it is safe. You're safely in our love, and that's an important concept to teach children that don't believe that, and that isn't reinforced. Can just give up and quit trying, and become apathetic, but B, more commonly, kind of become these overachievers, where they're always scared that they're not going to measure up, and they're always trying to please other people. In fact, the authors mentioned that they believe, there's a theory on this, and they kind of subscribe to the theory, is what they say, is that a lot of the midlife crises that people have really is kind of traced back to they never overcame that fear of not measuring up, and so all their life they were always trying to measure up to they were afraid that if they didn't, they'd be rejected, and so they're always measuring up, and finally they get to 40 years old or 50 years old, and they finally kind of backlash and say, I'm tired of living for everybody else. I want to just live for me. And they go buy the Corvette or whatever, and kind of the destructive behavior of a midlife crisis. But that's one of those innate fears that this age group has and has to be overcome. and again is overcome by convincing the child, reiterating the child, reminding the child, we love you. You're not always going to be successful, but we love you anyway. You know, and sometimes again, they may suffer the consequences when they didn't put the effort into their science fair, or they didn't practice, or whatever it is, you know, and they need to know that. They need to understand that their actions have consequences, both good and bad consequences, but the parents' love is always stable. So let me just stop there. And again, I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm going to go line by line and make you at least say that you don't have a comment. So Heather and Roger, I'm going to start with you, and you both have to speak up this time. We're not going to just let one person. So.
A second to get the mute off. I think the thing we see out at the boys ranch is, I mean, we certainly see a lot of challenges with kids' behaviors because they've come from families where they, as children, have taken a backseat to so many other different interests of the parents, whether that be because of addictions or other practices within their families that have led the kids to really be discounted. But certainly see and the kids also understand, hopefully, that there's a lot of value in knowing that the people that are there taking care of them do love them, do accept them, regardless of whether they're successful at something or not. But just regarding the natural consequences, that's one of the things that we have to work on with our staff all the time, is making sure that the consequences for behaviors that are not acceptable, that they're somehow logical and natural, that there's a way to connect that consequence to the actual behavior, and that in that consequence you're actually teaching them the correct behavior or the behavior that's desired.
For me, I think it's just what Roger said is absolutely true, and it's not always easy. I know natural consequences are not fun, and they're not easy, and even experiencing those with our own kiddos is somewhat difficult. I mean, right now we're looking at natural consequences for Noah choosing not to do his homework. Well, he's a senior, and it may mean he doesn't graduate with the rest of his classmates, and we're going to let him experience that. But I'll say it's definitely easier said than done.
It is, and but think about the value it teaches, you know, in life, and that's really the thing is, you know, when they're young, it's hard for them to see those consequences. It's hard for us to let them experience those consequences, but the consequences get more dramatic the older they get, and so if they don't learn the lessons early in life, they can really have some detrimental consequences later in life, and it's tough. I mean, you're absolutely right, Heather. It's easy for me to sit here and say, oh yeah, you got to let them do it, but you know, I've been in situations where Janda's had to pull me back and say, no, he's gonna have to live with it, you know, what he's done. So thank you all for sharing that. Janda, you're next on the list.
I got nothing.
All right, Linda, how about you?
Okay, I got my time now. Okay, so all I kept thinking while you were talking was my competitive card playing can pay off. I've taught Adam how to play cards, and he learned how to play cribbage yesterday, and he's competitive just like his grandmother. And there's a good and bad. His immediate reaction if he loses is not so good. Winning is great for him, but we're teaching him that he has to be a good sport when he loses.
Yeah, and a good sport when he wins as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I guess I got to try that part too. I don't set an example there. Nanny. I run.
Kendra?
I was just thinking about the unconditional love when you were talking about that. And it's just a reminder to be positive and to show that unconditional love over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's well said. And really, as I was reading for this week's, or preparing for this week's, you know, I thought, you know, do I need to talk to the boys, our three boys, and make sure they know? I mean, we push them to be successful in you know, their sports and their school and stuff. And I've got one sitting down here with me, and it made me think, do I need to make sure they know that we love them anyway? You know, we want them to achieve, but our love isn't dependent on that. And so that actually is one thing that I intend to make sure is clear to them. But yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Kendra. And is Jimmy around close enough that he can also weigh in?
He is sitting here, but he does not have a comment.
Well, that's too bad. I always enjoy his comments in class, but I guess I'll wait for Sunday to hear him next. So, okay. Well, thank you all very much for being here tonight and talking with me, and I appreciate your comments. We've got one more week to go, and then we'll be done with this series. So thank you. Have a good evening. Stay warm.